I think it's an important subject, and I think the special committee gives us probably the best opportunity that we have to do something in the area of budget reform that we're going to get. And that's why I think this is, we have got to seize this opportunity. Now, I'm trying, if I'm going to summarize what your arguments have been in opposition to a joint resolution that would have to be signed by the President. One is that the executive could slow down the budget process, create unnecessary delays by, being resistive to whatever Congress is trying to do there. Secondly, that it would violate the checks and balances, the separation of powers, give too much power to the executive. Is that a fair characterization of what your basic arguments are in opposition to that idea?
I would only add one, which is that I'm concerned that actually you might end up with less fiscal discipline as opposed to more. Because if you made the budget resolution a statute, then there's all kinds of things that could be changed by statute. Some of those things might be things that would offer more fiscal discipline, but it could be just as likely that the President of Congress would agree on things that could relax fiscal discipline.
But there are limitations in the current Budget Act which just wouldn't change about what can be put in to the budget. I mean, Section 301 defines what would be put into a budget. So if the concern is that Congress might put more in there to load up a budget resolution, or the executive might negotiate with Congress for something along those lines, it strikes me that would not, as the current budget statute would be applied, be permissible.
Well, I don't know whether that would be true or not. I mean, there are all kinds of examples of legislation, appropriation bills being one example, where all kinds of things end up in appropriation bills.
But those are appropriation bills. We're talking about a budget resolution here. And the budget resolution is pretty prescriptive about what can and can't be included in that. So, and this doesn't change the basic nature of the budget resolution. All it simply says is that at some point in the process, you ought to have some buy-in from the executive. And I would simply say, I mean, delay the process as opposed to not doing a budget. Give the President more power to increase deficits, as if we don't have a $1.5 trillion deficit today. I understand all the theoretical arguments about checks and balances and about separation of powers, but we have a crisis. And that crisis is we can't get people around here to agree on how we are going to solve the major problem facing this country, and that is the fact that we have year-over-year $1.3, $1.4 trillion deficits. We have a debt to GDP at 1-to-1. We have deficits to GDP at 10%, historic levels. You have to go back to the end of World War II to find this. And we can't do anything about it because we're paralyzed here. And we have this goofy process that includes a vote-a-rama, where everybody comes in and we have these votes that we don't debate. They're mainly messaging amendments. This is a broken, dysfunctional process. And what I hear you saying is we don't like what you're proposing to do to change it, but I don't hear anybody saying here's what we have to do to fix what is a broken, dysfunctional process. And let me ask you this. If you had a backup, let's say, for example, that the process failed, that the President vetoed the budget resolution. If you had a backup that would allow for a concurrent resolution or an automatic CR or something that would put some pressure on this process to get something done, wouldn't that help address the concern about about us not being able to pass one? I'm really struggling with the distinction here between the theoretical and the real. I mean, we're dealing with the real right now, and the real isn't working.
I feel much better about having that backup. I think you'd have to kind of have a trigger point when that backup would trigger in. I'm a little concerned if you combine that with the 60-vote point of order against moving appropriations, that we'd be waiting around to see if the Hail Mary works, and meanwhile the regular block and tackling work of government, appropriations and other things, will get stalled in the process. I think we have to find a way for Congress to do its work. And yes, we want the big Andrews Air Force Base Summit. I don't think they happen more than once in a generation, but we want to have those big level agreements. I'm totally in agreement with you. The question is, how do you do it? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize other things? And I think that's really the question. I do agree that the concurrent resolution backup, if it could be done in a timely way, might help the process go forward here.
Well, I mean, I just look at today. We haven't moved a single appropriation bill across the Senate floor. We're going to take one up this week, I hope, but we don't have one signed into law. I mean, in the last 34 years, there have been four times where we've passed the appropriation bills on time. I mean, I don't see where delaying the budget resolution by involving the executive is going to do anything to delay a process that's already delayed. Well, look at this. Last year, we passed 8 continuing resolutions. We didn't finally get a budget until earlier this year for fiscal year 2009, which started on October 1 of last year. 2010, we passed 3 CRs. 2009, we did the omnibus in March the following year when the fiscal year had begun the preceding year. 2008, we did 4 CRs. And we end up at this backed up at the end of the day, and that's not a way to run a country. Now, I understand democracy is imperfect, and we're never going to get it ideal around here, and it's not going to run, everything is going to be beautiful and perfectly timed. But we have a broken, dysfunctional process. And to me, I'm suggesting if maybe this isn't the way to correct it or to fix it, but it strikes me at least that on those occasions when we've been able to get a budget, it's often been when we've had some sort of summit where the executive gets involved and we sit down together and say, this is what we're going to do. And at least it binds us to do something around here. Yes?
I think all three of us agree with you, the critical state we're in, the dysfunctional budget process. My concern has been everyone keeps looking at Congress. And I think you're not going to get out of this until the United States, understands that the president has an absolute duty to get it off on the right start. A lot of presidents say, I want a balanced budget. Well, send one up. You've got the authority to do that. So what we need leadership from the top. And if you get that, then your process here will work.
Well, and the president submits a budget. And it doesn't matter which president it is in the time that I've been here. The president submits the budget and Congress declares it dead on arrival. I mean, it's like, that doesn't mean anything. We're going to write our own budget. And so you never have that buy-in. There's never that sense of ownership. And I think the American people believe, wrongly, that the president is involved. I mean, I've talked to colleagues on this panel, and you heard Senator Warner talk, and I talked to one on our side who said, I never realized until I got on this committee that the president doesn't sign the budget resolution. I think there's an assumption. I mean, the president signs appropriation bills. And at the end, when we get into these big omnibuses at the end of the year, if the president wants to, he can hold the process hostage because he ultimately has the veto pen and he can force us to come back here. I find the whole idea that involving the executive earlier on in the process, is somehow violating this notion of checks and balances and separation of powers to be completely out of touch with reality, with where we are today. And I understand when that was developed in '74, there were some things going on in the country where we needed that independence, and Congress was trying to assert a little bit more of its authority. But this is a crisis, and we're paralyzed here. And I think the American people recognize that. I think it's very tough if you're an agency of government to have any predictability when you're not going to get a budget until you've got a CR that may be at last year's level, maybe at whatever the Appropriations Committee marked, but we're going to do this until this date, and then we'll try and get a budget, and then next year maybe we'll get a final resolution of this. This is just, it doesn't work. And so I appreciate your observations. I wish you were more supportive of what I'm trying to do here, and maybe there's a better way of doing this, but I'm not seeing it.
And just one quick point. The reason budgets come up dead on arrival is because they come up irresponsibly drawn, where the president doesn't take any responsibility. They're unrealistic. Once presidents did, and that was the expectation, they would not be dead on arrival. You would accept the aggregates, and you would change their priorities as you like. But we have not had responsible presidents for a long time.
Just to add to that, I think you're putting a lot of your hopes with the president. I think a lot of our expectations should be to strengthen this committee, this body. I mean, I was part of the Peterson-Pugh Commission, a consultant with them, and they came out with a Back to Black report where we said this committee should become a leadership committee where the leaders of all the committees should get together and work this out. Whether it's every year, every other year, I think that's where a lot of the change, frankly, could be productive here.
Yeah. And I don't disagree with that. We're vested with the power of the purse, and that's something, obviously, we have failed in our responsibility here too. I'm not, but all I'm saying is, I think there is a way that can work that is superior to what we're doing today that would get more teeth into this thing in a joint resolution that my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.